Hi, welcome. And I hope everybody who's tuning in is really feeling good and feeling comfortable with the energies that have been around us. I'd like to start off by thanking everybody. I've had a great response to the previous video about the Neptune retrograde, and I'm very, very grateful. So thank you all for tuning in. I've had a lot of people come on in and like my page and start to follow that, so that's fantastic for me. I'm feeling very grateful and I'm feeling very humble. So we're going to kick off with the latest news, and that's coming up to moving into eclipse season. So we have 3 eclipse seasons a year. We have one at the very beginning of the annual year, one in the middle, which is now, and one at the end. And as you know, eclipse season is really good for a new start, for a cleansing, for moving on those aspects of us that are old or have have served their purpose. Just because something's old doesn't mean you need to get rid of it. It might be a foundation for you, and that's really important. So what we're going to be doing is we give us the opportunity to explore those aspects of us that are really fundamental to us. So the sun is in Cancer, is moving into Cancer, and that's interesting because remember we talked to you about it's nurturing and it's supportive and it's a little bit protective, and that's a lovely aspect to have. So just bear in mind that even though it is an eclipse, it's in a lovely, gentle, nurturing sign of Cancer. Before we move on to the eclipse, on July the 1st, Mars enters Leo. So that means we have Mercury and Mars in Leo. So we've got very dominant planet Mercury and Mars, which are very strong planets in terms of being forceful, communication, pulling yourself out there, and Mars, the planet of war, but also the planet of business and the god of business, should I say. So both of those have moved into Leo, the sign of the lion. So I really don't need to expand too much on that. It simply is we are going to be going for it. If there's something that you want to get under control or get hold of, now is definitely the time for you to be doing it. It's time to stand up and ask for something. It's the time to go after something. The only caveat I'm going to give you is both of these signs are not big on details. So remember, Saturn is in retrograde, so whatever we go forward with, if we don't push ourselves and remind ourselves to go for the details, Saturn is going to make us redo some of the work to make up for that. So just be aware of that, and that's on July the 1st. The big thing that's happening is the new moon on July the 2nd. And it's a lovely new moon in Cancer. And new moons are about beginnings, it's about something new, and it's about moving forward. And in Cancer, it's all about nurturing, and it's a little bit about what I refer to as a foundation needs, and that's what we need to be thinking about and working with. I just want to make a quick apology if you can hear that buzzing in the background. My neighbours have been building and working for the last week or so, and I said it was going to be a small job, but this small job has continued on for quite a time, and I'm still going ahead with the session, even though I'm sorry you're going to hear that buzzing in the background. But if I don't do it now, I think I'll never get around to doing it, because there's no sign of that work finishing quickly. So my apologies. So what we're talking about is having a look at our foundations, which has often got to do with how we see home and how we envisage and understand home and what that means to us about home. And remember, it's a new beginning about thinking about how that is. So I want you to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and that first two, which talk about physical security, And maybe we're also talking about emotional and psychological security and spiritual security. So it's very much aimed at what makes us feel secure. And also, it's a great time to be thinking about and working with the bottom two chakras, our foundation chakras. Because often what we tend to do is we get a little bit excited about the idea of our spirituality, and we work a lot with the higher chakras, but remember the chakras are in a pyramid, so the foundation chakras are really important. And now when we're talking about a new moon in Cancer, this is actually what it's asking us to do. It's asking us to spend some time with our foundations and get those nice and strong, because it's a change coming up for that. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about the eclipse. But at the moment, I'm just talking about the full moon. Then I'll talk about the eclipse, and then I'll bring it together. So what's going to happen with this new moon is it's going to be touching on the areas where we're vulnerable. And there's a great woman called Brené Brown who's done a lot of work on vulnerability. And what she did a whole lot of research into what makes people successful. And she found that people who are successful, and however you define that, whether you define that in personally happy, environmentally happy, spiritually happy, emotionally happy, or financially rich, across the board, these people were comfortable with their vulnerabilities. So this is a time when we're going to have the opportunity to have a look at what makes us vulnerable and have a look at our relationship with those vulnerabilities, how we feel about being vulnerable, whether we're comfortable or not with those vulnerabilities, and whether we embrace them. Because it's not about us being these massive warrior queens or Wonder Womans or Supermans. What it's about is us actually embracing those aspects of being human that make us vulnerable, and being really comfortable with that, because that's what gives you the strength. Is not having the vulnerability, it's being completely comfortable with the vulnerability. And this is the opportunity. And what it's asking us to do is to really surrender to these vulnerabilities and surrender to the unknown aspect of them. And you see, this whole process of surrendering to your vulnerabilities and surrendering to those aspects of them that are unknown is really, in many ways, making yourself vulnerable. And it's about us being comfortable with that. Because this is really the foundation for us for spiritual growth, energetic growth, and personal growth. Is if we can embrace what makes us vulnerable, and we can face that, and we can name that, then we can begin to accept it, bring it in, work with it, and work it within ourselves, and find out how to make the most of that. And if we're attempting to hide those vulnerabilities or hide from those vulnerabilities, and we sense that we need to make ourselves impenetrable, then that's when we start to cut away things or people or emotions that make us feel vulnerable, and that's when we start to limit ourselves and hide ourselves. So it's a great time for doing that. So I want you to really think about that. It's a different way for us to be thinking, but it's a time to really embrace and get comfortable with our vulnerabilities and bring them in, and this way it completes us, and in many ways it also opens us up. Okay. So that's the new moon, and then wham bam, on top of the new moon we have the solar eclipse. Now this solar eclipse in the 2nd of July, this is part of a series that's been happening over 3 years. There was one in 2018, there's one now in 2009. What can I say? There's noise all around me today. And then there's another one in 2020. And they're all in early July. And so this is a really interesting eclipse. So it's in the middle of a process of cleansing out and healing, but it's not necessarily healing our vulnerabilities. We keep those vulnerabilities, but it's healing our our emotional responses to those vulnerabilities, when our emotional responses are out of balance. So this is the healing that's going to be taking place and the cleansing that's going to be taking place. Now, before we can cleanse, before we can release anything, we've got to be able to name it, we've got to be able to identify it, and we've got to be clear with it. And then we have to accept that that is part of us, that's something that's happened, that's something that has been in our lives. And then, so we name, we accept, and then we can release. So you can't skip any of those points in the releasing process. So it is us being aware of that. This is not something that happens to us from some external force. This is something that creates the environment for us in which we can take that action, where we have that choice about releasing something, accepting that this was part of us, and also accepting that this may not be part of us anymore, or choosing to let that go. See, when you choose to let something go, you're actually accepting that it was part of you, and it is no longer a need for that to be part of you, and that it's time to go. And often in that process, that can be when we feel vulnerable, because it's like we're losing a part of us, and that's when we get insecure, and those little niggles can start to happen about, do I really want to do this? Because it's a bit like, if I let that go, and if I let that part of identity go, what replaces it? Wow, something beautiful is going to replace it. Never fear about that. Something's going to grow, because we are talking about a new moon, we're talking about a new beginning, we're talking about a new relationship. So this eclipsing is part of that process. And what we're doing here is we're actually working on something that started 12 months ago, and then we're going to do a little bit more now. We're going to be working on it for another 6 months, and then we're going to take a bit of a break, because you can't keep just working on everything forever. And then we'll pick it up again, and we'll do some more release work in July 2020. So that's what I really wanted to say to you about the eclipse that's coming in. It's very lovely, it's very beautiful, it's very gentle. We're already in the process, and it's about us getting very comfortable with our vulnerability and using that comfortability as a stepping stone to success, in however we define success, and acknowledging that part of the human process is to be vulnerable, and just embracing that, and remember the little flaws, the little vulnerabilities in us. That's what makes each one of us unique. That's what makes each one of us who we are. Okay, they're beautiful. So don't worry about not being perfect. We're having a human experience, and part of being a human is imperfection. Now, the other thing that is going to happen is on the 3rd, straight after. So it's going to be a little bit of a turbulent time, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. The thing that's going to happen on the 3rd is that Venus is also going to join Cancer. And beautiful, because remember, Venus is about love and value and what makes us feel valued. And you can see that when we start to think about vulnerabilities, even just the word vulnerabilities, it sounds like it's devalued, but we need to start valuing that, and perhaps even acknowledging that that vulnerability in ourselves is what makes us beautiful, and what makes other people really love and appreciate us. It's not the lack of vulnerability that makes us beautiful. It's the mastery and acceptance of vulnerability that makes us beautiful. Okay. So we're going to feel far more sensitive, because remember, it's Venus in Cancer. Cancer is nurturing and protective and loving, and Venus is also about love. So we're going to feel very sensitive around this time of the eclipse and the new moon, and that's going to have that sensitivity for a good week, 10 days, probably also up to 2 weeks for us. But that's okay, because as well as being in this sensitivity, we're going to also feel highly affectionate. We're going to feel loyal. We're going to feel quite dedicated, and it's a lovely, lovely feeling. So it's going to be quite expansive. So not only am I going to ask you to work on the bottom, the first two foundation chakras, but perhaps also work on your heart chakra and just make sure you expand that. Okay. So we are going to come into this lovely little gooey feeling of affection, and we're going to feel very affectionate, and we're probably going to feel very vulnerable. So I'm going to encourage you during this time to hug yourself, hug other people, and allow yourself to be hugged, because there's nothing better than when you're feeling vulnerable for someone to hug you, either physically or verbally. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing to happen. If you've got friends and family who you see are feeling highly vulnerable right now, don't forget to send them love. Don't forget to send them either a verbal or give them a physical hug. So there we are. I've taken a bit longer than normal, but I thought it was important to go through that. So in this turbulent time, get comfortable with your vulnerabilities. Some of those vulnerabilities we'll be able to name, we'll be able to accept that they're part of us, and then that'll also be part of the release program. Some of them we're just going to embrace, but there's definitely coming up a new relationship to who we are and how we think of ourselves, and in particular, how we work with our vulnerabilities. Okay, take very good care of yourself. Hug yourself, it's really important to do. Hug your loved ones and your friends. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye. I'll do the tarot in a minute and I will post that. Bye.